one more guest, one more segment here for this Monday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is with Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
It's going all right, man. And, it's Monday morning, so it's always a little bit of a slow start. But I have to say I'm doing quite a bit better than that Philly Subway fan.
Ooh, man. I got to say, man, I part of me feels really bad for laughing at that poor guy. But at the same time, and again, the commentary from inside the train car is pretty awesome, too. I always love that collective kind of sound. It kind of makes a video, honestly. But, all right, so we've got Philadelphia, New England here. New England, 5.5-point favorite. And as I was talking about with Joe during that previous segment, that's down a little bit from the look-ahead lines that we had last week, where we had New England anywhere from 6 to 7 with varying juice out there, depending on what sort of exposure the sportsbooks were looking at early on, and also knowing their clientele. I mean, that's a big thing with the look-ahead lines as well, is that you're throwing out a number, you want it to be a good number, but you're also throwing it out there knowing that your clientele is going to be, dog players or favorite players or, whatever the case may be. And then obviously we had some unknowns about Tom Brady's hand situation going into that game against Jacksonville. Seems like he'll be fine for the Super Bowl because he was pretty much fine in the AFC Championship game. So what do you think about this adjusted number here at 5.5?
I think it makes sense that number was adjusted. Philly won that game in really impressive fashion yesterday against Minnesota. I don't see how anybody could have seen that coming. Nick Foles was 11 for 11 passing in the second half against the number one ranked defense in the NFL. I figured the Vikings would win that game. It was one of those spots where it was a little bit of a tough spot for the Vikings based on, the way they won the week before, and that was certainly the concern for them. And it seemed like they were flat, New England, they weren't really impressive for the majority of the game. They were just impressive when they had to be. And, give them credit. They do this every time. They're a team that finds ways to win. I think it makes sense that the line has come down a little bit. This total is going up, definitely. You have a 47.5 open. You have 48 almost everywhere now, 5 times 48.5. 63% of the bets on the over so far, and 94% of the money on the over. So really, it seems like the over is what's moving the most right now. There's 55% of the bets are on the Eagles and 59% of the money on the Eagles. I'm curious to see what happens with this line because usually the Patriots would be the public side. The Eagles winning the way they did yesterday might make that a little bit muted from what it would have been, though.
Yeah, it'll be real interesting to see not just where the lines go, but the timing of the line move, because you're going to have some sharp guys that want to go out there. Once they get a feel for this market and get an expectation of where this number is going to go, they'll go out there, take some positions, get out in front of the market. But seasoned bettors like you and I, and like a lot of the people out there that move numbers, we fully understand that there's really no reason to tie up your money early on here for the Super Bowl. You're better off waiting for the prop betting market to come out where there's a lot less efficiency. You can find some very, very good values there by just playing props. And quite frankly, for the most part, over the last several Super Bowls, I haven't even really taken that strong of a position on the side or the total for the game because I've been more interested in the props where I feel like I get, a better bang for my buck. So, we won't see a ton of movement on this game early on, I don't think. And, you've got now a situation where you sort of want to wait and see what's the status of Rob Gronkowski. Is he able to practice late in the week here? Do they bother to do anything with him this week? And, will he take the practice field maybe next Monday, something like that? That may encourage a little bit of movement in the marketplace. So I think for our listeners out there, if you're interested in betting the side here for this game, and it's the Super Bowl, so you probably are, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think you have to jump in anytime soon.
No, I don't either. I don't think you really should. You want to know about Gronkowski. I don't think we'll find out a lot about him this week. And, I think early next week is a good bet as to when we'll find out about him. If you like the over, you certainly want Gronkowski to play. I think if Gronkowski plays, this number will go up as far as the total. Even if he doesn't play, it may go up a little bit more. I think if you like the under, you wait here. You like the over, maybe you go ahead and take a little bit, but certainly Gronkowski matters a lot. On the side, I don't really know where this game's going. I'll say that I'm not going to have a strong opinion on this game. it's nice to be able to come on here and say that, I don't think I'm going to like anything very much about the Super Bowl here because, a lot of these types of shows, you'd feel pressured to have a strong opinion. But I know that, Adam always encourages everybody not to, just bet whatever is out there. And I think that prop betting in the Super Bowl has a significant amount more value than betting the side here. This line is going to be the sharpest line that there possibly is. So you don't have to be a hero here.
No, you really don't. I mean, I get it. It's the Super Bowl. You want to have some money on the line, and that's perfectly fine. But I think allocating it for definitely makes a lot more sense. And again, as we'll talk about throughout this week and next week, and as I'm sure you and I will touch on as well, Kyle, but I can kind of plant some of these seeds here with our listeners. Now, if you like Philadelphia in this spot, you got to figure Nick Foles has a pretty big game, right? Or, maybe Jay Ajayi has a really big game. So you can take a position on Philadelphia, but do so at better odds in that if Philadelphia wins, Nick Foles is probably pretty damn good, or Jay Ajayi has a big game running and catching running out of the backfield and catching out of the backfield. Maybe a defensive player steps up. You could throw a shot on like a Fletcher Cox or, maybe a Darby pick six, something like that. And obviously go back through and look at the MVPs. A lot of times it is the quarterbacks. We've had a couple of defensive players. I know Dexter Jackson was one a few years ago, and then obviously Von Miller a couple Super Bowls ago. So there are going to be opportunities to do that. If you like New England, well, maybe instead of playing New England on the money line in the minus 220 type range, you just go ahead and play Tom Brady to win the MVP. He's done it in 4 of his 5 Super Bowl victories. That line's not going to be minus 220. So you can take a position on New England that way in a more creative manner, and get a little bit more return on your investment. So, I know everyone wants to play the Super Bowl, wants to play the 5.5, 6, whatever this number goes to, but the prop bets are absolutely the way to go here. And again, like you said, I mean, that's what I love about this show is that, on some shows, or if you're out there listening to, like major radio stations or something like that, everyone and their brother is going to have an opinion on the side here. But we're going to take it several steps further and look at those props. I'm even handicapping the novelty props and the national anthem and Justin Timberlake's halftime show. And we'll talk about all that stuff here over the next 10 episodes on Bang the Book Radio, over the next 9, I guess I should say. But, Kyle, I completely agree that, prop bets are where it's at. And you can get down a good amount of money on these prop bets now offshore. I mean, this isn't like they've got $50 or $100 limits or something like that. We're talking whatever your regular unit size is for most of our listeners out there, you can probably get down something close to that on these props. So, again, make sure that you're managing your bankroll wisely.
Yeah, and those props, the other good thing about them is that you're not going to have the same line everywhere. So you can shop around and get a really good line somewhere. Maybe you get 3 or 4 yards better than somewhere else. Maybe you just get a lot better juice than somewhere else. On the game, you're going to have pretty much the same line everywhere, especially as you get closer to the game. So that helps as well.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if this game sits in that 4 to 6 dead zone where, you're not going to get much line value anywhere you go. If this thing drives up to 6.5, 7, which it could. I mean, I honestly don't know exactly where this line's going to go. And again, the Gronkowski injury has kind of got us in a holding pattern a little bit here in terms of early line movement. But if this thing starts to go up and you can, go to a place that's got a 7 and buy it down to 6 or, buy it up to 7.5, or, you've got a place that's got 6.5 and your other outlet has 7, all those things are very important for you. So, if it's sitting between 4 and 6, though, not a whole lot of important value either way. And again, that's where, some of those prop lines being off a little bit more can be really, really beneficial for you. So, again, once we get some more prop betting options out there, we'll talk about those, and we'll certainly do it a lot on next week's shows. But, Kyle, I guess the last thing I'll ask you about here, and, I could probably save this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it now. In terms of your NFL season here, we had favorites do very, very well in the middle of the year. Dogs got it back a little bit late. How do you feel like the NFL season has gone for you overall?
I did really well in college football. I didn't do very well in the NFL this year. It's been a little bit of a down year in the NFL for me. Just to be frank, we've said this before, the NFL market's harder than the college football market is. And when you have as many favorites covering, it's even harder for a guy like me. I try not to play a lot of favorites in the NFL, and favorites were the way to go this year. It's a difficult market. You've got to try to, get the best line value you can, but you're not going to beat the closing line by a significant amount like you can in other sports. So the NFL is a whole different animal, and there's a lot more variance that goes into the NFL than there is in a lot of other sports. So the NFL, I would say I'm a little bit disappointed with my performance in the NFL this year, but I would say probably quite a few other people were as well.
All right, let's talk college basketball. We got a lot of talking points to get to here on today's show. And go ahead and start with something that you and I love to talk about. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss here on the shows, college basketball futures market, and looking for value that's out there. We're about halfway or maybe a little bit more than halfway through the conference play portion of the season. Conference tournaments, the very small ones, will start about a month or so from now. And the Big Ten, of course, elevated from a timeline standpoint here. That'll be an earlier one this season also. But then you got a lot of them there over the first couple of weeks of March. You've got March Madness now less than 2 months away. So it's a good time to take a look at the futures market. We did it a little bit last week with Ed Fang on the show. Now we'll do it here with you on the show as we had a listener question about looking for some values out there.
Question from the listener, and I knew this was something that you'd look forward to talking about. Both of us like looking for futures value. It's nice to be able to have this kind of discussion. Like you say, it's a good time to look for something like this. The first one I like Florida, plus 4,000 right now at 5 dimes. This is a team that came really close to making the Final Four last year. Elite Eight team last year. They've got a lot of the same players back. They have a really good coach in Mike White. Florida is split about 15th favorite in the betting market to win it all. I think there's certainly a better team than that as far as their chance of winning it. I think this Florida team certainly has Final Four potential. If you get a Final Four team at plus 4,000, you could get some really good value there. So I like Florida. I think that they started the season playing well. They had a little bit of a rough patch. I think Florida's going to play well here throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to take a look at, too, and especially because you have to start considering here, when you're looking at futures, you want to try and figure out where some of these teams may be seated once we get around to the big dance. And when you look at a spot like the SEC here where, you've kind of got – you sort of don't really know how this conference is going to finish up. I think it's very wide open once we get to the SEC conference tournament. But with Kentucky falling back, Tennessee falling back, our old buddy Rick Barnes, Auburn, you don't really know if Auburn is completely there yet. If Florida can win this conference, and this is a much better conference than it has been in the past, they're going to be up there on one of those high seed lines. And that's very important for you. If you're looking at a 40-1 and they're going to be, a top 3 seed in their region, then that's something that's very significant. If they can avoid, maybe running into that 4-5 game where then they'd play the number 1 seed as you move throughout the tournament, something like that. Obviously, we all know about the 13-4, 12-5, that type of thing. That's important. You want to look for some equity in your futures prices, sort of estimating where some of these teams may be seated. And I think because of that, Florida at 40-1, as you mentioned, at 5 dimes, 20-1 at Bet Online. So again, speaks to that whole point about shopping around. I think that's a look where you're on the right track.
Yeah, I liked it a good amount, and I think this Florida team, they showed what they can do against Kentucky on the road. Say what you will about Kentucky not playing very well lately. That's still a good win. And like I said, I think they've taken their lumps. Every team's going to have a rough patch at some point throughout the season. I don't think we have a dominant team this year. And it would be easy for me to say I like Villanova. I do like Villanova. Plus 500 at Bet Online. I think that's a decent price. But I'm trying to find better value here and look for longer shots with these for this week. The other one that I like a decent amount here is Xavier. Xavier 60-1 on 5 dimes, 25-1 on Bet Online. So just a massive difference there. I like Xavier at 60-1. Xavier has consistently been really good in the NCAA tournament. Every year there are some questions about them. Can Xavier do it again this year? And they make a deep run almost every single year. They have a really good coach in Chris Mack. They've got a really good leader in Trayvon Blewett. To me, Xavier is a team that plays in a conference in the Big East that is a lot better than people realize, certainly a lot better than it was a couple of years ago. And, I think the Xavier team could make another run this year.
Yeah, and before I mention a few of the ones that I've looked at, and I do have a few tickets that are out there right now on some of these teams, what I want to mention is that when we talk about these futures and college basketball, the format of the tournament sets itself up really, really nicely for us to be able to do this. But it's great if you pick the winner. I mean, if Florida wins at 40-1, that is absolutely fantastic. That is a phenomenal hit. But you set yourself up to make profit. That is the most important thing as far as I'm concerned when it comes to these futures, is that you want to pick something to where if you hedge a little bit, you're still going to make a profit out of it, because that's what your ultimate goal is. You're tying up money. You want to make sure that you're able to get some sort of equity out of that money. So the reason why taking a team like Villanova at 5-1 or something like that is pretty difficult is because you don't have a whole lot of hedging margin. If they get to the Final Four, or, then maybe you have an opportunity. If they're in the Elite Eight, you need them to win that game pretty much with a 5-1 ticket. So that is some very important distinction that I want to make here on today's show, is that you want to be able to guarantee profit. That's why you want to look at some of these longer shots who maybe don't have that high of a chance of winning the tournament, but can make a run deep enough for you to start hedging into that 40-1 type of price.
Yeah, certainly. It's hard. You get a 500 plus 500. You really just got to think that team could win it. There's no point in looking to hedge out in the Elite Eight. The Final Four you might be able to, but I think if you take a plus 500, you probably want to wait till the final game. You wouldn't have to wait. I think that's the type of one where you just think that team's going to win it all. And that's fine. If you do, that's fine, but I don't think there's really those hedging potentials. Like you said, I think there's a lot of teams down here in this value range where you can have hedging potential, get Elite Eight, something like that run, and really make a lot of money.
Yeah, definitely. And I've taken a few positions here so far from a futures standpoint. I've got a couple on Purdue. I've got them at 40-1 from BetOnline. I've got them at 38-1 at DSI. That's one that I'm extremely happy with, given the way that Purdue's playing here so far this season. But that is one of the really challenging things I think about betting futures, Kyle, is that you want to try and get in there when the price is good. I mean, right now, Purdue's at 16-1 at BetOnline, so that was obviously a great grab, and I'm very happy about that one. But sometimes you run into a situation where you play a team, then they lose a couple of games, and you could have gotten a better futures price. So another important thing to do here at this time of the year is, you mentioned a team like Florida. You can get out there at 40-1. Florida just knocked off Kentucky over the weekend. They play South Carolina and Baylor at home this week. If they win both of those games, especially if they beat Baylor in that Big 12 SEC showdown, which we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes, their futures price is not going to be 40-1 anymore. So you want to hop in there on that one and go ahead and grab that, even if they lose one of those two games, or maybe lose at Georgia on the 30th or lose to Alabama at home on February 3rd. I don't think the price is going to change that much. You generally see prices go down. You don't oftentimes see them go up because the books really don't need to move them up that much. So that's something that's very important, is the timing of when you're going to enter the market with a future.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's difficult to time the market. Obviously, it's kind of like timing the stock market. It's not the easiest thing to do. But, you can look ahead at the schedule and see who you think they might be upset by, or who would be a big win to go up against. And that can kind of make you have a little bit of an idea of when to try to enter the market.
Here's another one. This one I've already played, and, they've lost 3 of their last 4 games here. So, I don't know if right now would necessarily be the buy point. I've got Texas Tech at 125-1 from earlier on in the year, but they have dropped 3 of their last 4. They're 25-1 right now at BetOnline, but they are 80-1 at 5 Dimes. So I think Texas Tech is a team that's worth going out there and grabbing right now. Couple of tough losses there on the road in Austin, and they also lost up at Hilton Coliseum. And we talked about this with the Big 12 in that, Iowa State's a bottom feeder, but going to Hilton Coliseum is a really, really tough place to play. We saw that with Texas Tech getting blown out. I think Texas Tech with Chris Beard, he'll isolate the problems pretty quickly and should have this team back on track. But I think grabbing an 80-1 right now, like the number at 5 Dimes, is a pretty good look.
Yeah, I think so too. I think having that good of a coach at the helm, playing that tough of a schedule in the Big 12, they're going to be tournament ready. I think the Big 12 could create some good value spots for futures investors if you look forward to, because the Big 12 is so good that everybody's going to lose several games here. I don't really think Kansas is a lot better than the rest of the conference like they have been in the past. They've been fortunate to get a couple of the wins they have lately. including that win over Baylor on the weekend. But to me, the Big 12 is so wide open that everybody's going to win some games, lose some games, and there's just one somewhat bottom feeder in Iowa State, but they're really not that bad. And then Hilton Coliseum's a tough place to play, where there's going to be some value come up on some of these teams that are very good teams.
One that I'm kind of upset about, you and I talked about this in the middle of the week last week. I was looking at North Carolina. They were available at 33-1 at a couple of places. Didn't take it. They're down to 25-1 now. So a little bit of lost value there on that one. But specifically here, the listener at Matt_D33 asked the general question about value. We've mentioned a few teams here that we're looking at. Also says that he kind of likes Louisville at 65-1. Now I look out there. BetOnline has 50-1. 5 Dimes has 100-1 on Louisville. What do you think about that play?
I don't like Louisville that much. I think that there's enough unknown about them. This is a team that has gone through a lot of changes this year. Certainly, they're 15-4. They've done pretty well this year. They won that double overtime game at Notre Dame. I think Louisville is a decent team. At 100-1. I can't argue with you too much. I think that's a good price. I'm not going to be taking Louisville myself just because I think they will lose a decent amount of games here the rest of the year in the ACC. Will you get a better price than 100-1? I think that's hard to say. Maybe a little bit better. They play at Virginia, home against Florida State here on the 31st and then February 3rd. And then they play also a stretch at the end of the year where they play North Carolina, Duke, and Virginia in 3 out of 4 games. So maybe you get a better price in that stretch. Possibly if you like Louisville, it'd be even better at that point. Though 100-1's certainly not a bad price. I think Louisville's not quite good enough on offense. They're 81st in the nation in offensive efficiency, though, and I think you struggle when you're that bad on offense when it comes time for March Madness.
All right, a couple other teams I want to talk about here, and we'll stay in the ACC to discuss them. This is one that I've kind of had my eye on, and unfortunately, right now, it looks like Mike Bray's team isn't even going to make the NCAA tournament. Notre Dame, they've dropped 4 in a row. I was kind of looking at them, hoping that they could keep their heads above water a little bit without Bonzie Colson. Right now, though, it looks like they may wind up playing themselves out of the tournament in general, unless they can start to pick up some of these victories here in conference play. But I see them now. They're all the way down to 150-1 at 5 Dimes. By the way, they're 33-1 at BetOnline. So I don't know what the hell they're doing over there in terms of their futures prices. They're really worried about exposure, I guess. But man, at 150-1 for Notre Dame, I don't know when Colson's coming back. I don't know if they can right the ship in time to put themselves in the tournament. But 150-1 looks kind of attractive.
They must really have a Notre Dame whale or something. That's pretty amazing. The fact that Notre Dame is a team, I really think Notre Dame is a team you can get good value on. Like you said, it's kind of disappointing they've lost 4 straight. I really like your thought here of taking Notre Dame at a really bad price. The problem is that they don't make the big dance, obviously. So we'll see what they do here coming up. They have that road game against Duke and then NC State and back-to-back. They'll probably lose the game against Duke. They need to win against Virginia Tech and then need to win that game against NC State. They certainly still have a shot at making the NCAA tournament. If it looks like they're going to make the NCAA tournament, despite the fact that they've lost a decent amount of games, maybe you get a 200-1. Maybe you get something like that. I certainly think this is a good look for value based on Notre Dame's potential with Colson is plenty good enough that you would have to like them at that price.
And that's a big thing for our listeners to keep in mind here. And we have one injury note that I want to touch on here. A team that I believe you grabbed a future on last week, Clemson, with Dante Grantham going out with a torn ACL. Second leading scorer for this team, second leading rebounder for this team. Huge loss. Is this a price that you did grab last week?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, thanks for reminding me.
Sorry.
I saw that injury yesterday, and I wasn't too happy about that one, obviously. Not a big position for me, so it'll be okay. But a little bit of lunch money on Clemson. I don't think Clemson can do it without him. I think he's too important to that team. I kind of feel bad for Brad Brownell, too. He's a guy that's been on the hot seat. He really is a pretty good coach. He does a good job with the defense especially. And hopefully Clemson still makes the NCAA tournament. I would assume they will. They'd really have to fall off badly not to. I do think they'll fall off. They'll probably still make it. I wouldn't be interested in Clemson at this point. I think that Grantham means too much to the team.
Well, but this is something that listeners want to look at here, is that you've got some teams that are dealing with some injury situations with guys that will come back, like Notre Dame and Bonzie Colson. I mean, again, it all depends on how far they fall before he gets back. But if there are some teams out there that are dealing with some injury situations and expect to get guys back here, in 3-4 weeks' time to where they'll be ready for the conference tournament and then ready for March Madness, well, you can certainly find some value on those types of teams because they'll spend some time losing games between then and now. Maybe you can look to take advantage of some of those teams. So, all right, let's get into some of today's show notes here specifically. And we just talked about the SEC, and you talked about Florida being a pretty good team to buy here from a futures standpoint. Ironically enough, our sell high team this week comes from the SEC.
Yeah, it's Auburn, and to me, this is a good long-term sell. This is a good team, but I think they're overvalued at this point. They're 12-5 ATS. I think they have to regress here. They've had a really nice benefit from a couple meltdowns here in the last couple weeks. Games that it looked like, they were going to drop off a little bit when they, specifically the Georgia game last week. Now, I know they won by 14 points, but Georgia was ahead by 16 points in the first half in this game. Auburn went on, I think, a 29-4 run or something in the second half. So complete meltdown from Georgia in that one. To me, Auburn is a team that they're certainly much better than they have been, and give Bruce Pearl credit for doing a good job with this team this year. I think I've said it before, and I'm sure I'll say it again. I have a hard time rooting for Bruce Pearl's teams, just, what he's done to so many schools with them being, on probation and having trouble after he leaves, and then just him going somewhere else. I'm not a big fan of that. So it's easier for me to say sell high on them than it is for some other teams. But I do think that, they play a tougher schedule here coming up in the SEC in the weeks ahead. And I think that them being 12-5 ATS so far this year, I think you can get some good value going against them.
Well, again, I like that you specified that that's a long-term look for you here, where you're thinking about that being a team you can make some money going against here on a fairly regular basis. And also, it's really important here to talk about this when we talk about a team like Auburn. Auburn scores a ton of points. They score 85.3 points per game, 15th in the country. They're in the top 25. They've got that gaudy record. When you think about the fact that we've got, for all intents and purposes, one football game left, you're going to get a lot more public involvement in the college basketball market, and there are probably going to be some people that will play Auburn thinking, well, they score a lot and they've played really well. You may get some value in terms of going against them because they're 15-2 ATS, but also because they have that sexy type of profile that, that amateur bettors like to look to back. And as you start to get some more of that money in the college basketball marketplace, going against Auburn, it may gain steam as we go forward.
Yeah, I think it will. I talked to another handicapper about this last week that, I really think that what you just said there, the football season ends and more public people get involved in betting here, is really the reason why underdogs do so well in the month of January and February. These prices get inflated. You get these teams that have done really well, ATS, and people just jump on that. They don't really pay nearly as much attention as what we're talking about here on the show. And I think if you're listening to this show, and I don't mean just my own segments, I'm certainly not trying to toot my own horn. If you're listening to Bang the Book Radio, then you're certainly ahead of the game because, most people are just going to look at that ATS number or what they remember from last year, and then they're just going to go make a bet. And those are the people that aren't going to win in college basketball. So I think that speaks volumes to why taking underdogs this time of the year would have good value.
All right, let's go over to the A10 here. This is a conference we talked about last week with Rolf Michaels on our Thursday show. If you missed that, we talked about the A10. So, a pretty good conference. It hasn't gotten a ton of run here on the show so far. We talked about Duquesne a little bit. But this is a conference that overall, on the whole, down a pretty large margin. I mean, right now this looks like a one-bid league with Rhode Island being the only team so long as they can hold serve in the conference tournament. But there is a team down toward the bottom of the conference standings here that you think is a good buy low candidate.
Yeah, and I would say that this is both a short and long-term look. I think that LaSalle LaSalle has been without their best player, B.J. Johnson, for several games, and he's back now healthy. They're 6-13 ATS. I think this team improves. LaSalle plays a favorable schedule coming up. They have a road game at Davidson, which is a tough one. But other than that, they play some poor teams here. They play Rhode Island at the end of the year on February 20th. But between now and then, I think LaSalle is going to be able to win several games here, and I think you're going to get some good value on them based on the fact that they're 6-13 ATS. They've lost a couple overtime games here in the last couple weeks. One of them a triple overtime game at Duquesne. One of them an overtime loss at Massachusetts. I think all of this creates some value, and then the fact that their best player was hurt and now he's back. Again, I think that LaSalle has a decent coach as well. I think Giannini's done a good job here in past years. I don't see any reason why they'd be quitting on the season, especially this early in the year. So I think you got a good buy low candidate here in LaSalle.
Yeah, B.J. Johnson, almost 21 points per game and 8.5 rebounds per game, originally recruited to Syracuse. So, a guy that obviously came out of high school with some expectations. Now, not just a leader for this team, in terms of his production, but also being a senior who started his college career during the 13-14 season, one of their veteran guys as well. So, you miss him in those late game situations. As you mentioned, losing some games there in overtime without him, now that you get him back, certainly a good angle to look at there with the Explorers. Speaking of interesting angles to look at, I mentioned the Big 12 SEC showdown here this weekend. These are strange games where you get some non-conference action, when you've been playing teams in your league for the last several weeks.
Yeah, I wanted to look at, how are these teams done in the past, or how have these games gone in the past when you get these non-con games late in the season. It's certainly interesting because, like you say, you're almost always playing against a conference opponent this time of the year. What happens when you don't? Well, in the past 10 years, it's been good to go with both the road team and the underdog. A specific stat here I have is non-conference dogs of 3 points or more that also have an ATS cover rate of 50% or lower on the year are covering in a 56.0% clip in the past 10 years. So that makes sense because you're looking for a team that really hasn't covered the number consistently this year. There are some good angles based on, just taking a team that hasn't covered that well on the year versus one that's covered 60% or more on the year, just in general, and I think it's magnified in these non-conference games. The dogs have done really well. Road teams have done a lot better than home teams in these as well. I'm not sure if that one makes a lot of sense to me because, you would get a team playing in a spot where they're probably not too used to playing. It may be that, it's just the home team's laying too many points. But in these non-conference games, the way to go has been underdogs and road teams. The over has also had some value in these non-conference games late in the season. I think that one makes sense. These games are a little bit less important to these teams than the conference games. And you can get some pretty low numbers if you get two teams that are usually pretty good defensively. Those low overs in these games have done pretty well.
What do you think the reason is behind why road teams have done better? I mean, is it just sort of a change of scenery, doing something a little bit different? Because you would think, as a road team going to some place to play a game that, doesn't necessarily matter for you. And, of course, Big 12 to SEC. I mean, we're not talking about, a short little trip for some of these teams. Why do you think the road teams have had so much success?
This is a hard question for me. I don't know the answer. I wish I did. I guess, my opinion would be that you just get these home teams that are favored in a lot of cases that are not quite as amped up for that game or to win by a spread as they would be in a conference game. I guess these road teams stay invested better than the home team, and, it's kind of a flat spot for the home team. Like you said, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because you're playing at a place that you're not used to playing, and you would think it'd be easy for the road team to not show up. So I'm not really sure. The only thing I can do is kind of guess, but it has been a pretty strong trend here. I'm going to look this one up as we're talking and see if I can find exactly how well they've done in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I'd be interested in finding that out because one of the big things that we talk about, especially as we get deeper into the season here, and this is certainly something we talk about during conference tournaments, is the different shooting backdrop. I mean, if you're going to a place that you play at every single year, you're accustomed to the sight lines, you're accustomed to what the crowd's going to be like. Now, maybe it doesn't matter as much in a couple of big-time conferences like the Big 12 and the SEC. We're going to be playing in big barns no matter what. But still, it just feels to me like that unfamiliarity, being taken out of your comfort zone, going somewhere that you're not really used to going, it seems like it would be more of a detriment. So I don't know, maybe it's just it's one of those unexplainable things that, we sometimes come across in this industry.
So road non-conference teams, 53.5% covers in the last 10 years, and that's a sample size of about 1,050 games. So, that's pretty good. You wouldn't want to go against that consistently. Having said that, though, if you look at the last 10 years, they did really, really well between 2006, 2010. So it actually goes back a little bit more than 10 years. They did really well between 2006 and 2010. And the last few years, the road teams have not done as well. So it looks like this could be a thing that's coming back to even a little bit. I wouldn't want to just go wild taking road teams. I also would be cognizant of this trend. I wouldn't want to just take a bunch of home teams, but it looks to me like this thing may be normalizing a little bit.
All right, we got 4 games that we want to discuss here for this week, and I really like this first one that we're going to talk about because, we talk about conference specialization, we talk about digging a little bit deeper than they're going to do on most of the shows out there. Battle for the top of the Summit League standings, the South Dakota State Jackrabbits, the South Dakota Coyotes. This is a big, big, big-time rivalry game in the Summit League. So what are you looking at for this one?
Well, first of all, this was a game last year that meant a lot to both teams, and they had some really, really close games against each other. South Dakota lost 2 of the 3 games. They were all extremely close games, 91-89, 74-71, and 73-72. So these 2 teams really played some close games against each other. I think this one's going to be really close as well. South Dakota, probably a really short favorite here, maybe 1.5, 2 points. South Dakota State has just been shooting lights out, 1.271 points per possession inside the conference. I keep telling myself they can't shoot that well consistently. I still don't think they can. It's going to come back down a little bit, but this is obviously a team that's full of good shooters, and it obviously helps when you have a guy like Mike Daum inside. So South Dakota State, to me, this is a harder spot for them because South Dakota lost to them by 3 points in the semifinals of the Summit League last year. They lost 2 of the 3 games. You got a South Dakota team that is really good at defense. So they're 52nd in the country in defensive efficiency, which is really good for a Summit League team. South Dakota State's very good at offense, not very good at defense. My lean here would be the home team laying a short number, I think. Not sure that I'll play this one, but I wanted to get some time to talk about both these teams just because I think South Dakota and South Dakota State are clearly the class of this conference, and the fact that it's a rivalry is also nice.
Yeah, and what's really important to point out here about what South Dakota State has done in conference in terms of their offensive efficiency is that, as you mentioned, this is not a league that's really predicated on playing defense. You tend to get a lot of games here that have the 2 teams, sometimes in the 80s, certainly in the 70s with ease for the most part. Now they run into a team that can actually play some defense. You look at some of the teams that they've played lately. They scored 98 against Western Illinois, 94 against the Denver team that doesn't play as slow as molasses anymore, 101 against Omaha. They like to get up and down the floor. So now they're playing a team that plays, with a higher level of defensive efficiency and doesn't, sacrifice offense to do it because they're still scoring almost 81 points per game. So, maybe this is a spot where South Dakota State does have a little bit of that regression to the mean.
Yeah, I think they do. I think that both of these teams play quickly. A lot of teams in the Summit League really like to run, so that's part of the reason that when you get the really high-scoring games, it's usually because they like to run and they don't play defense, and that's the case in the Summit League. But South Dakota is the exception to that rule, so my lean here would be South Dakota.
All right, let's stay under the radar here again. I love doing this. I love when we talk about games like this. We'll go to the Colonial Athletic Association, the CAA. William and Mary, they're a team that you've mentioned before here on the show. They take on Towson. What's the story with this one?
So this is my premium look ahead. I like William and Mary here, and I'll likely be playing this game. I think that they're going to be an underdog of a decent amount, maybe 7.5, 8 points. So if it's in that range, I'm probably going to be taking a William and Mary unless something happens between now and then. A revenge game for the road team. Revenge is a good angle in general in college basketball, but it is much better road revenge. You know, a team that didn't do well at home then gets to go on the road and try to get revenge. They have done really well in the last 10 years. I think if you just look at head-to-head ATS, if they lost the first one ATS at home and then on the road, you take them in that second game, and I think it's 55% or higher just in the last 10 years. So Towson's a team that they're a good team, but nobody in the CAA is dominant. You know, I think this is a CAA where there's going to be everybody's going to have a decent amount of losses by the end of the season. William and Mary, was just run off the court by them, 99-73, and it really wasn't that long ago. You get these quick revenge spots where it's not even 2 weeks between playing that team. They really remember this game well. William and Mary has won several games on the road already. I like William and Mary in this spot. I won't be surprised if they win this game outright. I do think they're going to be a decent-sized underdog.
Yeah, this game was actually played on January 13th, and William and Mary was up 41-40 with 3:06 left in the first half. They lost the game by 26. Towson was 38 of 59 from the floor, 64.4%, 59% from three. They were 13 of 22 from there. Now, to be fair, William and Mary does not defend well. And in fact, I was kind of box score watching their game against Northeastern because I took Northeastern on the money line. Figured I'd play William and Mary in the second half because Northeastern shot like 70% in the first half. And I'm like, well, that can't continue. Well, they shot 71% for the game, so apparently I'm a moron. But William and Mary cannot defend, but they can score a little bit. And they only scored 30 points in the second half of that blowout loss. So I think that you're definitely onto something there in terms of that game. So let's talk about a couple of major conference tilts to finish things up here for Handicapping the Hardwood. We'll go to the ACC. That's Virginia and Duke. And these are one of those types of games that we love to talk about here.
Oh, what an epic pace war. You've got Virginia 351st in the country out of 351 teams in tempo. They're also in defense. They're allowing 0.835 points per possession. That's epic. I don't know if I've ever seen that. They're not going to continue that, I don't think. I think they're going to come up against some teams here like Duke that are going to push that average back a little bit. But obviously, Virginia is really good at defense. Duke is excellent at offense, 1.266 points per possession. So you have a strength versus strength, and you also have a pace war. These are games that I love to talk about. Virginia, a team that I think is still a little bit hard to trust come March based on what they've done in the tournament in the past. But, they've been a really good team this year. They're going to try to slow this game down. Duke's going to want to try to speed this game up. I'm interested to see what the total comes out at here because Duke's totals are consistently, 150-something. And then you get Virginia where you have a lot of totals that are 120, 123. I think this total will probably be somewhere in the 135 area, but I think that'll tell us quite a bit about what the odds makers think about who wins this pace war based on what the total's posted at as well.
Yeah, and these pace war games are really interesting, especially when you've got two teams that are very good. It's one thing when you have a pace war in a smaller conference where you got a team that loves to run, a team that plays a lot of defense. You sort of think like in Conference USA, where you've got a team like Old Dominion, you've got a team like Marshall. Well, in a general sense, Old Dominion's probably the better team more often than not, so they can dictate the tempo a little bit easier. If you've got a talent mismatch or two teams that are very clearly not on equal footing, generally the slower team going to control how that game goes. In a game like this, though, however, where you've got two elite-level, high-caliber teams, I think then it's more interesting to see, what pace this game is actually played at. Can Duke speed Virginia up? Can Virginia slow Duke down? We've got, some data points from these two teams over the last few seasons, but, I think when you've got two teams that are really, really good as opposed to a pace war between one team that's good and one that isn't, I think it makes for a really compelling handicap.
Oh, I think so as well. And like you say, it's a lot better when there's two good teams who are good at doing what they do because, if you have one really good team, one really bad team, the team that's really good usually, dictates the tempo. So in this one, you have two really good teams that are good at what they do, one really good defense, one really good offense. Let's see what happens. I would be inclined to think that Duke would probably win this game. Duke's going to be favored in this game, so, I don't know if you want to lay too many points against Virginia, but I certainly think it's an interesting game.
All right, one more game to look at here on Handicapping the Hardwood, and we talked about the non-conference games in the middle of conference play. We've got the Big 12 SEC showdown here this week. You're looking at Kentucky versus West Virginia.
Yeah, Kentucky and West Virginia is unique because, Kentucky is very rare to see them as a decent-sized underdog. They're going to be a pretty good underdog here in this one. I think West Virginia will be favored by 7 or 8 points, and it's almost unheard of to hear a Kentucky team be at that price, but Kentucky's not playing very well right now. They lost at home to Florida, not necessarily a terrible loss there. They lost on the road to Tennessee. That's a pretty bad loss. They lost at South Carolina, 76-68. Kentucky, at the beginning of the season, what I figured Kentucky was going to be was a team that struggled a little bit on offense but was elite on defense. And they've struggled a little bit on offense, but they haven't really been great on defense either. They're 28th in the nation in defensive efficiency. I would have certainly thought they'd be better than that. The other thing they've not done is take care of the basketball. 20% of their possessions are ending in turnovers, and that is way too high for a team like Kentucky. The problem here, obviously, is they're playing against West Virginia, who is so good at taking the ball away. Second in the country in forced turnover percentage, 26.4% of opponents' possessions end in a turnover. So can Kentucky handle that press? Both of these teams are usually teams who can rebound the basketball well, especially offensive rebounds. So I would think this would be a fairly high-scoring game, but this is going to have a high total, so I don't know if I like the over that much. I can't lay that many points with West Virginia in this spot. Be hesitant to back Kentucky against a team that's that good at forcing turnovers when Kentucky can't take care of the basketball.
A lot of good thoughts here on today's show with Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com. What's going on over at the website right now, man?
Well, a lot going on. Sign up for the free picks newsletter if you haven't already. 63 and 32 last 95 free picks. Also, new special for the rest of college basketball season, $399 for the rest of the year. I've had a good college basketball season so far. Hope I can continue it here the rest of the way. It's been a good sport for me in the long term. So if you're interested in that, at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter or Kyle at HunterSportsPicks.com.
Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. We'll chat about our prop bets for the Super Bowl on next week's show, and then also another Handicapping the Hardwood segment. Thank you for joining me, man. I'll talk to you again next week.
All right, looking forward to it. Thanks.